Is this chaos we're witnessing just headline fodder designed to boost news ratings? Or does it reveal a master plan, a meticulously coordinated campaign, unfolding in plain sight? On October 26th, the world was rocked by a series of cascading events. A stunning Russian breakthrough on the battlefield in southern Ukraine, seismic political aftershocks in the capitals of Washington and Moscow, and a crippling assault on Ukraine's vital infrastructure that left millions in darkness. Are these just disconnected tremors, or are they signs of a calculated, synchronized campaign designed to tip the balance of the entire war? Let's rewind to that fateful day. October 26th. Russian troops shattered Ukrainian defenses in the Zaporizhzhia region. Make no mistake, this was no minor skirmish or isolated clash. The breakthrough threatened to sever key Ukrainian supply lines, putting an entire southern military formation at risk of being encircled and cut off. With one bold move, Russia jeopardized Ukraine's ability to hold the front, raising the specter of collapse in a region critical to the nation's survival. To understand the gravity, imagine a chess game where, in a single turn, your opponent threatens both your queen and your king. The consequences are immediate and potentially devastating. Meanwhile, away from the front lines, diplomacy careened off script. Donald Trump, in a move that caught even his closest advisors off guard, abruptly canceled a planned summit with Vladimir Putin. This blindsided allies and adversaries alike, casting uncertainty over the already fragile dialogue between East and West. Within mere hours, the United States and European leaders unveiled new, coordinated sanctions, escalating the confrontation as Moscow lashed back with furious threats and promises of retaliation. The political temperature soared to levels unseen in months, reminiscent of the Cold War's most tense standoffs, when a single gesture could shift the balance of global power. Even as threats ricocheted through capitals and diplomats scrambled to recalibrate, Ukraine was plunged into literal darkness. A devastating multi-pronged strike crippled the country's electrical grid, leaving entire regions powerless. This was not random destruction. It was a deliberate move to dismantle Ukraine's ability to function, targeting both morale and logistics. The message was unmistakable. Russia was now prepared to break Ukraine's will as well as its resources. This echoes the strategic bombings of World War II, when entire cities were targeted not just for military value, but to sap the enemy's spirit and force surrender through attrition and hardship. Treating these events as isolated crises risks missing the true danger, a shift toward a unified, methodical Russian strategy meant to overwhelm Ukraine from every direction. If we fail to recognize this bigger picture, we become vulnerable to narrative traps, outdated assumptions, and the next, inevitable escalation. The question must be asked, are we witnessing the opening moves of a much larger, more comprehensive strategy, one that aims not only for territorial gains, but for psychological dominance and geopolitical realignment? To see what this means for the war's future, we need to connect the dots between these shocks. Only then can we understand the new phase that is taking shape, and what it will demand from Ukraine and its allies. What is really unfolding on the ground, and why have Ukraine's traditional defenses unraveled so swiftly? To answer this, we must examine the events erupting in southern Ukraine, where the sheer speed and scale of recent Russian gains have stunned even veteran analysts. Russian forces have shattered what many believed were unbreakable Ukrainian defensive lines in the Zaporizhzhia region. These breakthroughs are no accident. Russian commanders exploited vulnerabilities left exposed after Ukrainian reserves were shifted away earlier this summer. This is reminiscent of the German blitzkrieg in France during World War II, where holes in the French lines were exploited with devastating speed. The outcome in Ukraine is a widening breach, with Russian troops now threatening to encircle the Ukrainian grouping at Huliaipol. If successful, they could sever both supply routes and escape corridors, trapping thousands. Eyewitness accounts confirm that numerous villages and critical strongpoints in both northern and southern sectors have fallen rapidly to Russian control. This is not mere symbolism. Each loss narrows Ukraine's options. If the pace holds, entire Ukrainian formations face entrapment in what military strategists call a pocket, unable to maneuver, resupply, or retreat. This tactic has historical roots. Think of the encirclement battles at Stalingrad or Falaise, where armies were trapped and forced to surrender or be destroyed. The seeds of this crisis were sown months ago. Military observers point to a crucial misstep. Ukraine's command, fearing threats elsewhere, moved essential reserves north and west, stripping Zaporizhzhia bare just as Russia massed for a concentrated assault. That decision left southern lines dangerously thin at the worst possible moment. In military history, similar miscalculations have led to catastrophic defeats. The British at Singapore in World War II, for instance, failed to anticipate the main axis of attack and paid dearly for it. The situation grew dire after a major Russian attack near Mala Tokmachka. Russian units launched a synchronized offensive from 3 directions. With overwhelming force, including armored spearheads and relentless firepower, they smashed through Ukrainian defenses that had endured for weeks, opening new fronts and causing a cascading collapse. To visualize this, imagine a dam that has withstood storms for months, suddenly giving way under a concentrated surge, flooding everything downstream. But this is not just about troop numbers or territory. Russian tactics have evolved. Precision-guided aerial bombs, relentless surveillance from strike drones, and a sophisticated use of electronic warfare have devastated Ukrainian command posts, ammunition stores, and vehicle clusters. Each strike denies Ukraine the time and space to regroup, paralyzing their ability to counterattack or mount a defense. Modern warfare, as seen in conflicts from Syria to Nagorno-Karabakh, increasingly favors those who can dominate the skies and disrupt enemy communications. These developments carry immediate, far-reaching consequences. Those who overlook such operational details, assuming Ukrainian forces can easily rebound, risk grave misjudgments about the war's direction. Such errors could warp policy, misguide aid, and derail military planning at every level. Take, for example, the Vietnam War, where American policymakers repeatedly underestimated North Vietnamese resilience, leading to years of costly escalation without decisive victory. Yet as tanks and artillery redraw front lines, another battle rages behind closed doors. Military setbacks are triggering diplomatic shocks, shaping the next phase of this war in ways that may be even more consequential than what happens on the battlefield. To understand how military breakthroughs are upending political calculations, we need to look beyond front lines and into the corridors of power, where every loss or gain is reshaping strategy and alliances. When missiles streak across new front lines and summits dissolve overnight, who is truly shaping the world's fate? While headlines obsess over battlefield surges and diplomatic theater, a far more perilous conflict is unfolding just beyond public view. The abrupt cancellation of the highly anticipated summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin did not happen in a vacuum. It arrived in lockstep with another barrage of United States and European Union sanctions, measures once wielded as the ultimate Western leverage. This time, Moscow's reply was nothing short of seismic. Russian leaders such as Dmitry Medvedev and Sergei Lavrov discarded the last traces of diplomatic caution. Their statements were blunt, almost incendiary, making clear that any patience for Western pressure has evaporated, and that the old playbook is now obsolete. The rhetoric echoed the confrontational language of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when leaders spoke with stark clarity, and every word carried the weight of potential catastrophe. Sanctions, once the crown jewel of economic warfare, are increasingly dismissed as mere theater. Russia's economy, battered yet unbroken, is restructuring itself for the long haul. Through import substitution, increased trade with China, India, and Middle Eastern partners, and a pivot to self-sufficiency in critical sectors, Russia is weathering the storm. With every new pronouncement, Kremlin officials sound more defiant, and the deterrence once promised by sanctions slips further away. The situation is reminiscent of Iran, which, after decades of sanctions, developed parallel financial systems to survive and even thrive under pressure. Analysts warn that the summit's collapse was not simply a rebuke to Russia. Instead, it reflects America's wider strategy in Asia, a calculated attempt to box in both Moscow and Beijing. Yet the effort is backfiring. With every escalation, the narrative is spiraling out of Washington's grasp. Rather than deterring Russia, each step seems only to deepen its resolve and accelerate its campaign. The unintended consequences parallel the dynamics leading up to World War I, when entangling alliances and tit-for-tat escalations made conflict almost inevitable. For Ukraine, the consequences are immediate and crushing. The supply of Western arms, once a torrent, has dwindled to a barely perceptible stream. International loans and aid are threatened by legislative paralysis in allied capitals, where political divisions and domestic priorities take precedence. As battlefield losses mount, Ukraine faces the double blow of economic isolation and the slow collapse of diplomatic support. Forced to bear the brunt, largely abandoned. The situation echoes the fate of South Vietnam in the 1970s, when waning American support sealed its fate. Even Western media, once confident of Russian defeat, is shifting its tone. The bold predictions have faded, replaced by uncertain headlines and growing unease. Russia's strategy, more cohesive and methodical than expected, is forcing a reckoning with uncomfortable realities. The narrative arc is shifting from triumphalism to cautious pessimism, as journalists and analysts recalibrate their expectations. It is tempting to hope that renewed talks or harsher sanctions might tilt the balance. But clinging to these familiar scripts risks missing the true shift. A new phase defined by open confrontation, unity of purpose in Moscow, and a vanishing set of diplomatic exits. The longer history of protracted struggles, such as the Korean War, shows that when both sides dig in, quick fixes become impossible and conflict drags on for years. This escalation is not merely a shift in tactics, it signals a transformation in Russia's approach to the conflict. The stakes, for all sides, are rapidly intensifying. The world is entering uncharted territory, where the risks of miscalculation and unexpected escalation loom larger than ever. What happens to an army and a nation when the grid collapses and darkness swallows everything? This is no accident, no passing blackout. In recent weeks, Russia has unleashed a carefully sequenced air campaign designed to cripple Ukraine's energy backbone. Thermal power plants, hydropower stations, substations, and key port infrastructure all have been hammered by relentless waves of missiles and drones. The attacks are reminiscent of the Allied bombing campaigns against Germany and Japan, targeting the enemy's industrial and logistical hubs to hasten collapse. Entire regions are plunged into blackout and cold. But these outages are not just about discomfort. When the lights go out and the radiators freeze, industry grinds to a halt, trains are stranded, and highways empty. Military convoys run out of fuel and supplies, immobilized. The lifeblood of Ukraine's logistics starts to freeze in its veins. This is a calculated attempt to turn the tools of modern civilization, electricity, heat, transport, into vulnerabilities. The assault digs deeper. Russian strikes deliberately target Ukraine's defense industry, factories that repair tanks, manufacture ammunition, and assemble drones. Each strike is a targeted blow, eroding Ukraine's ability to sustain frontline resistance and replenish its arsenal. This is not mere opportunism. It is a lesson drawn from history, where wars have often been won or lost on the production lines as much as on the battlefield. But the battle extends beyond the physical. Night after night, millions of Ukrainians endure chill, silence, and fear. Families huddle in candlelit rooms. Entire neighborhoods vanish into a hush of darkness. Isolation breeds exhaustion, and exhaustion gnaws away at the will to resist. The psychological toll is incalculable, akin to the London Blitz, where nightly bombings tested the resolve of civilians as much as the military. Each new barrage makes recovery harder. Repair crews labor non-stop, but with every obliterated transformer or shattered plant, the task grows more impossible. Ukraine's ability to restore power diminishes, while the gulf between Russian and Ukrainian operational strength widens. Over time, this creates a downward spiral. As resources dwindle, recovery becomes less likely, and resilience erodes. This is not just a tactic, it is a strategic weapon. The collapse of energy infrastructure does not only slow tanks or halt supply trains. It threatens the very fabric of civic life. Without power, factories shutter, hospitals falter, and hope flickers dangerously low. The entire national ecosystem is at risk, from agriculture to education to healthcare. To ignore the scale of this destruction is to miss the true cost of the war and the fragility of Ukraine's resistance. The grid is not merely a network of wires and switches. It is the nation's heartbeat in wartime. In past conflicts, such as the Yugoslav wars, the loss of infrastructure was a tipping point, hastening the unraveling of social order. But Russia's escalation is not happening in a vacuum. As the grid fails, Western political resolve and aid face new strains, exposing deeper vulnerabilities on both sides. The world economy, already reeling from inflation and supply chain disruptions, feels aftershocks as energy prices spike and humanitarian crises deepen. In war, is patient calculation more powerful than shock and awe? Beyond the headlines, a different kind of battle is unfolding in Ukraine. Russia is no longer seeking rapid, dramatic victories. Instead, it has committed to a methodical, grinding campaign, advancing slowly, wearing down Ukrainian defenses, and targeting logistics and morale with relentless persistence. This is the war of attrition, a style that defined the trench warfare of World War I and the drawn-out sieges of the Eastern Front in World War II. For Ukrainian commanders, the strain is constant. They race to reinforce faltering lines, stretching already thin reserves. Each Russian gain may appear minor in isolation, but together, they close off vital supply routes and threaten to unravel entire defensive networks. Week by week, Ukrainian forces are forced into harsh choices: sacrifice ground or risk losing what little strength remains. The dilemma recalls the elastic defense strategies of the past: tactical retreats to preserve fighting strength at the cost of territory. Meanwhile, Western responses have grown ritualistic. Declarations and sanctions are repeated for domestic audiences, their effect on the front lines increasingly questionable. This performative diplomacy now reveals its limits. There is a widening gap between Western promises and the actual support that arrives, breeding frustration and fatigue in Ukraine's ranks. Similar patterns were seen in the late stages of the Soviet war in Afghanistan, where external support ebbed and morale eroded. Inside Ukraine, media voices maintain an unwaveringly optimistic tone. Yet, beneath this, exhaustion is spreading. Hopes for quick victories have faded, replaced by a daily grind that saps energy as resources dwindle and pressure mounts. The psychological toll of prolonged conflict is well documented. In World War I, the concept of shell shock emerged to describe the cumulative effects of relentless stress. Winter is approaching, and with it, every weakness will be magnified. For Ukraine, the cold months will test not only military endurance, but also the resilience of civilians and the ability to simply survive. Russia's slow, persistent strategy is designed to exploit exactly these hardships, wagering that methodical pressure will outlast any burst of Western support or sudden tactical gains. The Russian winter has long been a weapon in itself, famously breaking the back of Napoleon's Grand Army and Hitler's Wehrmacht alike. Analysts and policymakers must see the reality. This is no longer a contest of spectacular offensives or headline reversals. The conflict has become a war of attrition, of systems, patience, and endurance. Misjudging this shift risks wasted advocacy, strategic surprise, and costly errors. Those who adapt, who understand that logistics, stamina, and flexibility now matter most, will be better prepared for what comes next. In military theory, the center of gravity has shifted from tanks and trenches to supply chains and morale. As the cold closes in, the stakes rise for both sides. The coming season will reveal which strategy, patience, or spectacle can truly endure. History is replete with examples where the side better able to adapt to changing conditions ultimately prevailed. The Allies' advantage in logistics and production capacity was decisive in World War II, even after early setbacks. While the world waits for a dramatic breakthrough, the real outcome is being shaped by those who move quietly and adapt with discipline. The headlines may chase the noisiest battles and political declarations, but beneath the surface, a slower, more decisive contest is unfolding. A war measured not in days, but through the unhurried grind of weeks and seasons. The lesson is clear. In modern conflict, endurance often trumps spectacle. Russia's latest moves reveal a lesson in methodical endurance. Instead of gambling on swift, risky advances, their strategy is incremental. Coordinated offensives, systematic attacks on energy infrastructure, and patient diplomacy that steadily limits Ukraine's options. The aim is not instant collapse, but the gradual erosion of defenses, morale, and international resolve. This echoes the strategies of attrition employed by generals like Ulysses S. Grant in the American Civil War, who sought to grind down Confederate resources over time. For Ukraine, the pressure mounts as choices shrink with each passing week. Losses of supply lines and mounting strain on energy resources do not dominate the headlines, but they quietly shift the balance. Ukraine faces the exhausting task of stretching dwindling reserves, managing weary units, and fighting to maintain both domestic and Western support. The challenge is as much political as it is military. How to keep the world's attention and aid flowing as fatigue sets in. Meanwhile, the West's reaction is fragmenting. Sanctions and diplomatic gestures, once powerful, have grown predictable and less effective. As Russia adapts, Western unity starts to falter, exposing the limits of quick policy wins against an adversary committed to the long game. The true cost of misunderstanding this slow attrition is not just strategic failure, but the danger of missing early warnings in future crises. The lessons of history are plain. Those who ignore the warning signs often pay the highest price. Surface-level stories, focused on daily advances or political spectacle, are tempting, but they mislead. The real risk is not only failing to understand this war, but missing the arrival of a new era of conflict, where patience, logistics, and systematic adaptation decide the outcome. Clinging to outdated assumptions can waste resources, squander opportunities, and lead to costly mistakes. The world has entered a period where the ability to endure and adapt will determine not only the outcome of this war, but the shape of global order for years to come. Grasping this shift is crucial. It changes how we interpret news, where we invest, and how we advocate for policy. In a world of fleeting attention spans, the real winners will be those who look past spectacle and recognize the quiet power of methodical endurance. The future will favor those ready for a campaign, not a sprint. As events unfold, the challenge is to pierce the noise and spot deeper signals of change, both in this conflict and those that lie ahead. For governments, this means investing in intelligence, logistics, and strategic patience. For citizens, it means demanding nuance from media coverage and resisting the lure of easy answers. For policymakers, it is a call to humility and adaptability, a reminder that war and peace are rarely decided in a single headline or a single day. So as winter's shadow falls over Ukraine and the world watches with bated breath, the true battle is just beginning. It is a contest not just of armies, but of wills, systems, and time itself. Only those who understand this deeper contest will be able to shape its outcome and prepare for whatever comes next.